Welcome, everyone. My name is Hakeem Crampton, Government Relations Liaison for Citizens for Prison Reform, and I am also with the Participatory Defense First Hub. And we are excited that you are joining us for another series in our webinar series, focusing on understanding the criminal court process, understanding what a family needs to understand about the process if someone is in court involved, whether it be yourself or a loved one or family member. We are excited this morning, this day, that we are joined by Katrina Duling, that happens to be a Restorative Justice Practitioner. She is certified as a trainer, facilitator, in circling and conferencing. So we are excited to be joined by you, Katrina. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Hakeem, for having me this morning. I really appreciate you taking the time and also for your organization taking the time to learn a little bit more about restorative justice, learning about the process in restorative justice. So thank
Yeah,
you for
yeah.
that.
Absolutely. And we know much of this work is rooted in and around supporting young people, right? As they are adolescing, going into their adulthood. And this is the most important time to support them as they grow in making sure that, for example, the criminal court process doesn't derail the opportunity for their second chance to learn a valuable lesson and move forward in life. So I know that restorative practice is focused in and around supporting young people, right? But it also is because it's a community-based process. There's adults, the community, society as a whole is involved in this because they are stakeholders. So let's talk about what really is restorative justice from that point of view. What is it?
Thank you so much for the opportunity. And again, we want to really understand what restorative justice is. And restorative justice, Hakeem, is the process of bringing people together, those who were harmed and those who were responsible for the harm, but not only just those two groups of people, but we also want to bring together family members as well as the community to repair the harm. Because we know that harm comes in several different forms, right? So we have harm or victimizing of a person's rights or a person's safety. And so we have to look at that aspect of when a person is harmed, there is a lack of feeling safe, okay? But then there's also some harm that constitutes as monetary harm, okay? So, say for example, we have a child or an adult who potentially steals some money, okay? This process could work as well with those people and repairing that harm. This harm could also be harm done to property, okay? So restorative justice can be used for several different types of harm. And the bringing people together, this is where there's an accountability, okay? Because not only does restorative justice focus on repairing harm, but it also focuses on healing rather than punishment, okay? It really centers around relationship building. It helps to foster communication, and then it also helps to build up a community. Let me give you some examples of what I'm talking about here. Okay, so we have a situation where we have a person who has, let's just keep it simple. We have a person that has bullied another person, okay? Whether that bullying turned into a fight or whether that bullying turned into gun violence, okay? There is someone who has been harmed, and then there's someone who has caused that harm. But not only are those two people affected,
Mm-hmm.
we also have a community involved. We know what happens in our communities when we
Right.
have people on the streets and we have conversations happening and nobody really knows what's going on. And so when we bring those people together and family members together, it eliminates that stress, and then it also helps to reduce recidivism rates. Because the thing about restorative justice is that consensus is made in either a circle or in either a conferencing. Okay, if we take and look at the traditional systems, our criminal justice system, our juvenile justice system, and even our systems in our schools where we have zero tolerance, we have a law being broken, and then there's determined guilt, and then punishment is imposed. Okay, this differs from restorative justice because what restorative justice does is it brings people together to repair harm and a consensus is made. Restorative justice, Hakeem, I just want to let you know, it's an emotional process
Hmm.
because feelings come out, okay? I have done circles for over 10 years and I have seen several different types of emotions come out when we come to the circle process. I see several different types of emotions come out when we come to the conferencing process. It is not determining guilt, it's asking the question, what happened? Okay. And so when we have the parties come together and ask that very first question, what happened? And we have the victim talking and saying their side of what happened. And then we have the offender coming together to describe what happened. There might be two different stories, but if there is a consensus made, then that circle or that conference is successful. All right.
Hmm.
And this is why we have to have families and communities involved as well. We have situations where we might have a victim and they might think to themselves, this is not going to work. Then we might have an offender coming together with the victim and saying, this is not going to work. But guess when it works? It works when we have family members also talking about how it affected them. And then when we have communities coming together and explaining what and how it affected them, that's when the circle and or the conference starts to work. We know that a lot of times in our judicial systems, the imposed guilt, the breaking of the law, as well as the imposed punishment is very one-sided. And then once we have that imposement of punishment, is there really any justice? Is there really any peace that occurs with that victim? Or is that victim terrified that potentially when that person gets out of the facility that they're in, that they're going to become unsafe again? And so the process of restorative justice, the questions that are asked, what happened? What were you thinking about when this situation happened? Who did this situation affect? And then how do we make this right? Because we have to know that the offender and even the victim at times, Hakeem, have to be held accountable for the mistakes that were made. Are we willing? Is the offender going to be willing to take ownership of what they have done? And not only just an apology in this case, Hakeem, but also an action plan. How will I reconcile? What will I do to make this right? Okay.
Hmm.
And so the restorative process, it takes time
Hmm.
for the restorative process to take place. Because what I have seen in the years of restorative circles, Hakeem, as well as in the years of restorative conferencing, it takes time to get the right people to the table. It
Hmm.
takes time and willingness on both parties to even participate in the circle or the conference. And this is why I am glad that you have me on today, because I am stressing the importance
Hmm.
of people being willing to come to the table just to start the conversation. When we get into the circle and even the conference. There is a signed consent. We have guidelines for the circle or the conference to make sure that the circle and the conference remain safe. And then the
Mm-hmm.
facilitator, which is my responsibility, is to know that there are times where emotions will intensify in that circle.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so the
Mm-hmm.
strong facilitator knows how to guide the questions, knows also when emotions do intensify, and potentially give people a break within that circle process so that it remains safe.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So this sounds like, the importance of resolving conflict in community among society, right? There's an important process to go about doing that to restore justice and to center healing in the process as well, as opposed to the
Yes.
courtroom process, which is very systematic. And it's
Absolutely.
a lot of exercise to control and not much of voice inclusion of both parties, so to speak. There's
That's
really
correct.
representation of prosecutors and attorneys and judges really doing all the three-way talking between them, and the
That's right.
people is left out of it, right?
That's right.
So, restorative conferencing and circling is an alternative. So let me ask you this: is there opportunities in some court situations where there's a referral from the courts to restorative justice so that it is doesn't have to go through the court process itself? A
Yes, there
diversion?
is an alternative. But there has to be advocating and there has to be buy-in by the court systems to want to take this alternative process prior to the imposement of punishment. This
Mm-hmm.
has to be tried. Just like in our school settings, just like in our juvenile detention centers, prior to the offender going in, getting locked up behind bars, there has to be an alternative, at least to try this process. There
Mm-hmm.
are forgiving people out here, Hakeem. There are people who do want to have that conversation of, why did you do this to me? Or let me explain to you what I was thinking about when I offended you. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So, yes, there needs to be an alternative measure to the actual sentence that is put in place and the actual determination of guilt and the actual imposement of the punishment. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. Yeah, because the punitive process, really is a way we've been thinking here in America. Really,
Yes.
from my understanding and the history lesson, it comes out of slavery. It comes out of the treatment of people who weren't
Absolutely,
considered
Hakeem.
worthy of full human treatment. And the
That's true.
so-called offense against the law was taken in a very punitive way. It's like you better
Absolutely.
straighten up while you're here under the worst of
That's
harshest of
right.
circumstances, or else. And I think that we
Absolutely.
we forgot the humanity in us since then. Like we're far from that thinking, from that mainframe, but we've maintained a justice system that still behaves that
Absolutely.
way. And so this
Absolutely.
alternative process here seems to be something that we need to be really, really helping support grow as a part of the community's life, part of the community's culture,
Absolutely.
as opposed to being a part of some system that comes in and seeks to, restore justice, so to speak, without there being any healing involved.
Absolutely. Because our goal is to repair harm. The goal is to focus on healing rather than punishment. And
Mm-hmm.
is there, and I'll say it over and over again, is there any healing taking place? Is there any reduction of recidivism even
Right.
taking place when there's no healing involved?
Right.
When we see young people going into the juvenile justice system, when we see young people getting suspended from school, a
Mm-hmm.
lot of times And I've heard this from people. I blacked out. They'll say it to me. I blacked out. I wasn't even thinking about what I was doing. I just did it. Okay. And so once that adult or that young person is able to sit back and think about what they've done, a lot of times that's even where the healing takes place. And then
Right.
they have to come to the table with that victim and say, look, I made a huge mistake. And then looking over at their mothers and fathers and siblings and aunts and uncles and those church members or those people that they look up to, their coaches, or those the friends that they look up to and say, you know what? I made a mistake and I want to make things right. I don't want people to be scared of me. I want to pay people back. I want to just to repair that property that I damaged. I want to make things right. And so it takes, like I said, it takes a consensus between the victim and the offender to come together willingly to get this process started and to heal the entire situation. Our
Mhm.
world would be a better place if restorative justice was a major alternative in the criminal justice
Yeah,
system.
absolutely,
Absolutely.
absolutely. I have a couple books in front of me. Of course, I have my Restorative Justice Conferencing book, right? Of course,
Yes,
I have
yes.
that,
Very
right? So I
nice.
have my
Very
certification.
nice.
But I have another important book that is really at the heart of this conversation about restorative justice because
Yes,
it really deals with conflict resolution, right? It's really what this is all
absolutely.
about. There's conflict in the community,
Yes,
something
it is.
happened, and there needs to be a resolution. And how do we do that? So I have this important book, right? Crucial
That's right.
Conversations,
Yes, I have
because
that too.
restorative justice, the conversation in restorative justice is an important, crucial conversation that needs to be
Absolutely.
had because we're going to talk about harm, we're going to talk about healing,
That's right.
importantly, we know that the outcome of that is to restore a sense of
Yes.
safety, a sense of
Yes.
community. Still, that when someone does something to another person in their community, you feel that they should be separated and ostracized from each other, and they're no longer connected because one is so-called the victim and one is so-called the offender. Like in the criminal
Right.
justice space, that we don't use that language ourselves, right? We know the system still does, but we don't use that language
That's
because
right.
we want to bring in a more human approach to this, that we are neighbors and community members and we made mistakes
Yes.
against each other. And so
Absolutely.
we know that the crucial conversation helps bridge the gap in
Yes.
restoring us as friends, as neighbors, as
Absolutely.
communities, as partners. And that's what restorative
Yes.
justice conferencing and circling is all about.
Absolutely. We want to build relationships. We
Hmm.
want to, and the thing about relationship building is that it is so important for us to live together as a society. All
Hmm.
right. So we find out that if, for example, we have someone who has harmed, and then the person who has been affected by the harm, how many other people are affected? All right. And I like that book, Crucial Conversations, because that book talks a lot about the fact that these conversations are not easy. They're not easy at all. And, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I'm not going to come to you and say the room is full with pleasantries when people get there. But the willingness to even walk in that room is a part of the healing process. Okay. And so we know that, and I know that from experience, the conversations in the rooms, and I want to stress this with families who have considered this or our systems who would like to even advocate for this. This is where the need of a strong facilitator takes place, okay? Because we do know that we have parties who have, yes, I'm going to try this, but some parties have in the back of their minds, Hakeem, I still don't know if this is going to work, right? And so there is the humanity. And I talk a lot about the humanity and getting to know each other and bringing the communities back together. This is such a crucial time for us to have community building and have that fostered conversation because a lot of us nowadays, we don't talk. And so even if we bring the conversations to the table, then that is all a part of the repair.
Yeah.
Yes,
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So, is there much resistance from the courts itself, from judges, prosecutors, defense attorneys? Is there opposition to
depending on
this?
the situation,
Hmm.
depending on the situation, right? So if we have, and I don't want to take out the fact that mediation is also a part of the restorative process,
Hmm.
okay?
Hmm. Right.
So it really depends on the case,
Hmm.
okay? And so with some mediations that have taken place, we have certain judges who are willing to allow mediation to take place, which is great, right? Um, and for some of the situations that I am familiar with,
Hmm.
restorative justice, unfortunately, has been happening when a person has already been locked up. And
Hmm.
so what we need is for restorative justice to take place prior to a conviction, prior to a sentence. And so, again, like I said, it really just depends on the situation at hand.
So essentially, we can also look at restorative justice, the process involved, the aims, objectives of getting people together to talk through very difficult, problematic situations. We,
Yes,
we, we need that to be an embedded practice as a part of our civic learning, right? Our civic learning as children growing up in schools and institutions, in home life, into
absolutely.
adulthood, the process of having crucial conversations to mediate and restore, justice, so to speak,
Yes,
and to ultimately achieve a resolution of peace, and bringing people back together. That needs to be a part of our practicum, our cultural practicum in life, right? Is that what you're saying?
absolutely. Absolutely. And this is the reason too. When I started out with, I'll just give you a little bit of background of how I started out with restorative justice. It was in the school setting. And and it was with a group of students in a school, and I was going there every other day. And we were sitting in class or in groups, and we were having facilitated types of circles. And the students, we were teaching the students how to even apologize.
Mm.
Okay. And that is one particular sector of communication that is difficult. Just apologizing. And not only apologizing, but being able to accept an apology. It sounds elementary, but it is critical in restorative justice. Am I willing to apologize, own up to my mistake, take actions so that this doesn't happen again in my apology, and then for the one who has been harmed, am I going to be willing to accept the reconciliation? And am I going to be able to accept the apology? Am I going to be able to accept that that person has actually owned up to what they've done? And now I have to trust and believe that that person is owning up to what they've done. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, because those are behaviors that if we learn them at a young age and we grow into our adolescent into adulthood with them, what we'll find is a
Yes.
society that respects each other and that lives amongst each other in peace, right?
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. And that's truly
Mm-hmm.
what our goal is. Our
Mm-hmm.
goal is repair, building relationships, fostering communication, and peace,
Yeah,
consensus.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah, this is important work, and we know that restorative practices happen in many different formats. There's healing circles. That's a form. Even having joining something like attending AA and NA, for example, is a restorative process because it's a support process, a support system that people need in their journey of healing and recovery. Right. So yeah,
That's
this is a
right.
conversation also about healing and recovery.
Yes. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. So I
So
um
yeah.
I tell people all the time that
Mhm,
it is very important to give it a try. And then
mhm.
I stress for those that are Hakeem working with you, this needs to be advocated more and more and more in our communities, in our court systems,
Mhm,
and in our systems, in our school systems, where
mhm.
our youth are growing up and they're going to be adults one day. And
Yeah,
our youth are going to have to be the ones that begin to communicate. Families, I stress this, in your homes, in your workplaces. The practice can be done wherever,
mhm.
whatever setting that you're in. Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah, and this even works in places like neighborhood tenant associations, right, where people
Absolutely.
live in close
Any setting.
proximity to each other, and neighbors get into conflict with each other.
Yes.
And if they
Yes.
regularly had weekly circles, those issues could be brought to the weekly circle and dealt with in a circle setting, right? And people don't understand that that's the
Absolutely.
restorative process as well.
Absolutely. It can be
Yeah,
done in any setting where there are a group of people and there is a conflict.
yeah,
So it can arise in, like you said, it can arise in a neighborhood tenant situation.
hmm,
They could be performed in school systems.
hmm,
They can be performed as an alternative to the criminal justice and juvenile justice system. They
hmm.
could be performed prior to a suspension or an expulsion of a student. They could
Right.
be performed in church settings. They could be performed
Mhm.
in work settings. They can be performed in sports, on sports teams. They could be performed wherever there's a conflict, Hakeem.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, absolutely. I get it. This has been a wonderful conversation. This has been a crucial conversation, really, to talk about restorative justice.
Yes, it
And
has.
we're excited
Absolutely.
that our the families that we support are getting a chance to learn things like this because for a lot of family members, it's their first time having to go in the courtroom with a loved one, and they're unfamiliar with what's going on. And when they have broader based knowledge of justice, of opportunities to restore justice and to know what justice looks like, then when they're in that courtroom setting, if they have to be, then they will have a better appreciation for what's going on and what a better outcome could potentially look like. So we're just excited to be
Absolutely.
doing this work, supporting families as they support their loved ones.
Yes, and thank you so much for having me, Hakeem. This was a great conversation, and I'm hoping that those who are listening to this conversation can really understand the importance of the restorative justice process and also the fact that please have the willingness in your hearts to try this process. It's a great, fruitful process. We want to be able to repair harm in our communities. We want to heal as a community, and this is one of the best ways to do so.
Absolutely, we agree. We thank you, Katrina Duling, for joining us
Thank
on
you,
this
Hakeem.
webinar. Absolutely, thank you for joining us, and thank everyone for tuning in and listening to us. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.